Hello and welcome to the second of my brief public talks about what I consider to be the important concepts and ideas in psychoanalysis that enable me to understand what goes on in our minds and in the way that we behave in teams and organizations and in our relationships. These videos are a part of a series that form a course that is available through either my own website or that of APKIOS, which is the Association for Psychodynamic Practice and Counselling in Organizational Settings. And we've organized e-learning for those people who work in organizations and want to understand something about processes that are going on unconsciously that affect the way that people work together and behave with one another. So I hope that you'll be interested and we'll have a look at what we have to offer there. In the meantime, today's talk is about how the conscious mind develops. Thank you. In this talk I want to describe how consciousness develops, and I'm particularly interested in showing the role of curiosity and interest, which is central to the development of consciousness. Consciousness grows out of the unconscious as a result of something that makes us different to the other mammals. I need to begin by telling you something about the unconscious. I have already described the unconscious in a video, oddly enough, called The Unconscious, so I'm going to remind you only of the essential features here and assume that you've seen the video, or encourage you to rush away and see the video. The original state of the mind is unconscious, which is the state of mind of other animals. The conscious mind develops out of the unconscious, and in fact what I describe in my talk is that it is like a kind of precipitation, and I'm going to describe what happens that causes this precipitation in the unconscious, which then becomes something that we describe to ourselves as me. The unconscious mind is never directly accessible to the conscious mind. I do not know what's going on in my unconscious. You do not know what is going on in your unconscious. However, as I said in the talk, we are rather good at being able to see what's going on in other people's unconscious. The important thing is that our unconscious affects the way that we experience ourselves in the world. All our sensations, whether they originate inside us, telling us about our physiological state, for instance that we're hungry or need to pee, or from outside us, sights, touch, sounds, smells, tastes and so on, are experienced as feelings and enter our minds at an unconscious level. So they come through the unconscious, and the experience is of emotional response, it's feeling response. What happens to those feelings next is the story of the development of the human mind. This process is specific to humans because it results in the development of consciousness. But how or why? The engine that builds the mind is the mutation that I think Richard Dawkins refers to in his work, where he suggests that there is a specific mutation causing the evolutionary step that makes a category change from higher mammal to human.
some people suggest this is consciousness, but I am arguing that consciousness is, if you like, a symptom of the underlying change. It is the outcome of the actual mutation, the result of it. So, what has mutated? Curiosity and interest. That's what's mutated. It has become what I would like to describe as a computer program that requires us constantly to explain to ourselves what is happening to us. It's not only psychoanalysis that takes this view. Other psychological models put the human drive for understanding or knowledge at the center of the human mind. George Kelly's personal construct theory holds that man is a scientist. In my view, this notion is fundamental to psychoanalytic theory. Nothing that has been deduced about the development of the mind works unless we accept this organizing process. Of course, psychoanalysts tend to use extraordinary words where simple ones already exist, so Freud and Klein called this process the epistemophilic instinct.
Higher animals show curiosity and interest, but it's not the driving force for them. And the evidence of our psychoanalytical studies of the mind has demonstrated that all of our experiences, and what I referred to earlier as our sensations, are accompanied by an unconscious representation of them. Interestingly, these representations are always in the form of images of ourselves in relation to others or to parts of others. I'll show this in more detail in future presentations where I've got some slideshows that I like because they move and it's all terribly exciting. But the purpose of this one, less exciting, is merely to show the basic process that leads to the development of the conscious mind.
We can see this broken down in what I would call the formula. As I've already said, the engine that builds the mind is a program requiring us to explain to ourselves what's happening to us, called by psychoanalysts the epistemophilic instinct. Actually, it's also described by another psychoanalyst, one who I'm particularly fond of, a chap called Wilfred Bion, who moved away from complex words that obscure what he's trying to say and reduced everything to letters, so he calls it K. Of course, he fails to make it easier to understand just by doing that. These explanations derive from what we already know. Now, this is very important, and it makes the whole business of creativity and creative thought very interesting, and I will take that up later in the series, particularly when we get to talking about the development of what my wife, Mary Morgan, and I have called the creative couple state of development. We can only explain what's happening to us using what we already know. This is also important when it comes to understanding why the sexual abuse of children is so damaging, because later on in their development, in adolescence, the images that get called up to help them to understand the changes that are going on in their bodies tend to be drawn from the abuse that they've experienced, which makes them not understand that something new is happening. Instead, they have this awful experience that they are, after all, the same as their abusers. Anyway, to get back to the subject, as I said earlier, these explanations take the form of images of the mind, in the mind of ourselves in relation to other people or bits of other people. These are called objects by psychoanalysts, and that's what's led to this theory being described as object relations. And finally, healthy development depends upon the ability of the individual to adjust or modify those explanations in the light of experience. In other words, you could say that in healthy development, these explanations are only hypotheses, and hypotheses are, or ought to be, available for modification in the light of further experience. But sometimes experience has no effect, and the hypotheses become rigid. They become unconscious beliefs.
I think this is a very important and helpful concept. It was created by a psychoanalyst called Ron Britton, who I think is one of the most creative psychoanalytic thinkers and writers alive currently. He's making the point that we all know what a belief is. It's not a fact. It hasn't been proved. So it is a matter of opinion and available for testing. We can think about a belief and form some conclusion about whether we really believe it or don't believe it, but we know those two are options. Now, of course, we often have an investment in not testing a belief. I mean, I'm quite certain that should she meet me, Nicole Kidman would completely fall in love with me, become utterly entranced by me. But I have no intention of testing that belief. The point is, even if we choose not to test it, we really know that it's a belief and not a fact.
But it is not true about unconscious beliefs. Since they are unconscious, we are not consciously aware of them. So, they actually operate as if they are facts. And in this way, they act to distort our view of ourselves and the universe we live in. They create a sort of vicious circle in which we believe we behave in such a way as to provoke evidence from the world around us that this belief is in fact a fact. So I might grow up believing that all men are dangerous. This happens very often, particularly if I grow up with a violent father. I form the view that all men are dangerous, and then, because I'm not aware that this is merely a belief, and if I'm aware of it at all, I take it to be just a fact of life, I will behave towards other men in ways that will provoke their aggression, which will of course prove to me that I was right all along, that all men are dangerous.
Thank you for watching this short video. I do hope you'll join me again on other presentations, and for the meantime, goodbye.